See, so this JPA, right, is I prepared for the bug loader stuff before I realized that we're going to use Pentaho. So I say might as well, since my memory is still fresh, so let's talk about JPA. JPA stands for Java Persistence API. Okay. So Java Persistence API layman term is it is an abstraction layer on top of the JDBC. If you're not familiar with Java JEE platform, it's a Java database driver that is supposed to work across any database. And then this JPA is a new standard started by Sun and from Oracle. It was created after the should not show you this thing first. Okay, it was created after the Hibernate. If you guys know what is Hibernate, it's created after Hibernate became popular. And if you do not remember what is Hibernate, it's object relational mapping framework for Java. So some of the stuff that the Oracle mentioned about is leveraging whatever Hibernate team has done and whatever Oracle think that there's a room of improvement. And that's why they come out with the Java Persistent API. You still can use Hibernate if you want. We can talk more about that. And there are some goodies for the NoSQL also. Okay. So why? Why do you want to talk about the JPA? JDBC, everyone use JDBC. Everyone like Spring, maybe data access objects. Spring data have quite popular. Hibernate are pretty good because the major reason is there's no standardization. Every vendor implement it differently. And the main reason JPA was created was, if you remember EJB before 3.0 was very complex. Okay, you have to implement, you have to know so much just to make it work. And it's supposed to be container managed, but you need to know what methods like EJB load. I remember those days, and all this contract unnecessarily, making it very complex. EJB 3 have two parts. First part is about the component model. The second part is JP. And Sun that time already foresee that this is going to be big stuff. So that's why the JPA was a second part of the EJB 3.0 specification. So that was the main reason. We want to simplify and want to make things make it easier for developers to use and to stick with the JEE. What is JEE, right? JEE is a lot of stuff, GNDI, a lot of stuff that most of us do not use. I mean, most of us end up like servlet, right? And all this transactional thing, JDBC is sufficient, right? So if you have questions, you can stop. Even though it's only 10 minutes, but we can be more than 10 minutes, right? Okay. So Sun specification, Oracle specification, if you forgot or you're not a Java consultant, there is this process called JCP and JSR. JCP is the people, the team, and the JSR is the results of it. So everything that the Sun do or Oracle do in Java are standards. That's why people talk about Java and why Java is still very popular. In some areas, it's outshined by JavaScript, but that has nothing to do with standards. But when we talk about Java, standards and standard specification, those take time. So like HTML5 standard take time, right? So that's what it is, and they want to make the JPA attractive to the whoever, like especially the Hibernate. So a lot of staff they follow the Hibernate and even make the Hibernate calls still possible. And they started with the JPA 1 2006. The latest one 2.1 is still in draft. It's not finalized yet. One is like very basic mapping. Does anyone know what is impedance mismatch? Impedance mismatch. Yeah, the IEEE, right? Engineering, right? Yeah. Okay, I'm talking about in impedance mismatch in the object-oriented world to the relational world. Does anyone know what is impedance mismatch? Okay, cool. Good. You do not know, I can talk.
You hook up your speakers and it's 4 ohms.
Impedance mismatch is, we always talk about the object-oriented, right? We're talking about objects. But unfortunately, in the reality, when we come to saving data, we are still dealing with relational model. In relational model, we talk about tables and columns and the relationship between them, joined by table joins and all those things. In the object-oriented world, we have objects. Does anyone know what is an object? It has 3 properties. Okay, make your life simple. It has an inheritance. This sounds like MIT course, but do not mean to be offended to anyone. Object-oriented, what is that? Inheritance, encapsulation, and then the polymorphism, right? In the database world, there's no such thing, right? You have lookup table, but we are trying to force it, say that is parent table. And then this join, we are talking about in the object-oriented world, we are talking about association and aggregation. We're trying to force ourselves to fit into the relational model. That is impedance mismatch. Okay? So it's difficult to do that. You know, sometimes when you want to, you have a table join, but in object-oriented world, we make it such that it is association into referring to another object, or that object is part of this object. We are just forcing ourselves. So, but in reality, it's not really worked that well. That's why we have something like JPA. And Hibernate was the one that make it popular, object relational model, but now we are talking about JPA.
So who's managing JSR these days? Like JSR used to be Sun, so is it Oracle people?
Yeah, Oracle still lead that with Red Hat, Google probably. Yeah, you know, I think Google is there. So main characteristic is of the JPA is annotation based. Why is it annotation? Ever since Java 5, it is you can put an add anything before the class or before the method and before the properties. Why is it like that? Because it's declarative and the compiler do the checking for you. It's not a string. That means if they can do a compile check. That's why annotation is good. And annotation, you can write your own annotation if you have time. But most people don't. So JPA is annotation based, and it is standard. Okay, everyone have to implement that. And if they want to innovate a bit, they can extend that. It's not related to EJB anymore. Okay, it was a part 2 of the EJB 3.0, but now it's totally out for like years. Yes, it is confusing. People still thought that when you talk about Java Persistent API, you still have to have an EJB container, all those things. No, that's not true. Yeah. So programming model, when you talk about JPA, you always talk about objects, right? And if, let's say, the lowest level denominator is JDBC, you talk about, you know, different database have different driver, and then you always view that your stuff as a connection, and then in the connection you deal with what statement, all those things, you know. But in JPA you deal with objects, and just telling you object is not going to make any good. But the main programming model is you have some mapping file that in the Hibernate world, but in the JPA it's called persistent.xml. Okay, that's the first thing you need to deal with. You can put your mapping inside that, or you can put your mapping outside, or you can even refer to the mapping to the Hibernate mapping file from the persistent.xml. It's very flexible. And then the second thing is in your Pojo, we're talking about Java, right? Plain old Java objects. In your Pojo class, you can annotate it. Specifically, you can put add entity. Okay? And then where is your primary key? You can, let's say the primary key is called employee ID. Then you put add ID. That's it. And the rest of it will be persistent by default. You want to put more things, you want to make it like do not persist it, you can put add transient or something. But so that's the idea. It's very easy. The third thing is obtain an instance of EntityManager. EntityManager is like when you do JDBC, you get the driver and you get the connection, right? But in the JPA, you deal with another facade called EntityManager. If you are a Hibernate guy or a girl, is a session. Okay, so and then you can perform a CRUD. What's CRUD? Do you want to know CRUD? I don't want to know. Cool. I try my luck just to make sure you guys are awake. And then you can do a query against it, right? In some implementation, some vendor use Lucene even as a query. You know, but the API is standard across the board. Whether you're internally using full index search engine or you are using the typical relational, does not matter for you. And then finally, you process the object as a collection. If let's say your query return more than one result, it appears as collection. It's one result, then you deal with one object.
Okay, so you said that, I mean, there is a difference between Hibernate and JPA, right?
Yeah.
So Hibernate is an implementation of JPA specification now, or?
Hibernate initially was not, right?
Right.
It
So
evolved
because it was
before
prior,
that.
yeah.
Right now, it is part of the JPA. I think since 2.0, Hibernate was part of the spec. It is one type of, it's not reference implementation. Reference implementation is EclipseLink, which was a top link, if you heard about that. Oracle bought the top link before to make it contribute to open source work called EclipseLink. So, but Hibernate is part of the JPA 2. Something.
I think Hibernate 3.0 is basically JPA and Hibernate 3.0. Hibernate is like a superset.
Yeah, so Hibernate has more features, right?
Yeah.
It
has to be. Yeah.
It has to be, right?
Yeah.
So what is the advantage of using JPA then? I mean, you can go use Hibernate with more features.
Good questions. Assuming
More complex.
no.
Yeah,
Hibernate are more complex. You're right.
Okay.
JPA has simpler set of API and more consistent.
Okay.
Like what I say, right? In order to persist a project, what do? Add entity, add ID. That's it. If all the other property, you can put add basic, but that is optional.
I see.
Any attribute that you do not want the container to manage to persist, you put add transient. Simple, right? Hibernate, you can put a lot more than that. And Hibernate is purely relational. There are two things. This is a bit slightly off topic, but since you asked, the JPA, right? There are two models. One is the annotation. The first one is logical annotation. The second one is physical annotation. Logical is like add entity. Entity means what? Entity can be table. Or, another good news, JPA support NoSQL. It can be a document, MongoDB. So that add document is a physical annotation. So it depends on what platform and what data store you're using. JPA support that. So it makes your life a bit easier to, I'm not sure whether you will do this, because normally people do not change a model suddenly. But the good thing is, let me finish that first. Change model means in your project XX, you're using the Oracle, right? And suddenly you want to use MongoDB. That's not going to happen, right? Normally, unless you start with a new application, all those things. But with the JPA also, you can mix and match. Your application can have multiple persistent manager, persistent contexts, actually, you have to deal with. One context deal with the Oracle, another context deal with the MongoDB. So that is another good thing among maybe 10 more that I cannot remember off the top of my head.
That's good. Good to know.
And also, like, if you're learning Hibernate, it's better to learn JPA first, and then Hibernate. A lot of times people just learn Hibernate.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because, I don't know, because Hibernate are so popular, is that there are more developers know Hibernate than the JPA.
Yeah.
But remember, JPA is from Oracle, and Java is owned by Oracle. So it is if you want to be a Java guru, maybe you should look into the JPA. And, you know, it's owned by Oracle, and Oracle database is not going to go away.
Oh,
How to annotate the things? What's the time now? I mean, do you have? Okay, cool. So, so as I said, right, there are only two things that you need to make a project persistable, or you want to persist the object. You put the entity, okay, and you put the ID. ID is a primary key. And primary key can be handled by the application, can be handled by the database. There are ways to specify that. Like, for instance, the generated value. That means your, I can't remember, I think it's database, right? Yeah, sequence. You know, if you use Oracle, it's sequence. If some other database, it could be something else. But that should not matter for you. The container, the JPA will handle for you. Let's say your data store is a generic term for database or Mongo or whatever, NoSQL. Does anyone know what, this is slightly off topic, what NoSQL stands for? Yeah, NoSQL. Cool! Too bad there's no gift for you. A lot of people thought NoSQL is, a lot of people thought NoSQL is, what is that? NoSQL, without
NoSQL, yeah.
But that's not true.
Not only SQL.
Yeah. So back to this slides. So if let's say your data store is a relational, you can use add basic. That is logical, add basic. And then add column, that is a physical annotation. Because it's platform related. And add transient, you know, if you do not want to proceed. I just highlight the most important. Okay, there are much more than that, but this should get you started or should get your interest kindled. It should make you feel like more like the JPA. Like, maybe not saying you'll fall in love with it, but and in the JPA, right, there is this thing that you always have to deal with. It's called EntityManager, and you deal with the persistent. Using persistent, you create from the factory. You create the EntityManager factory, and from the I know it's another abstraction. From the factory, you will create the EntityManager. And if you're a Hibernate person, EntityManager is the session. And
the uname is the JNDI.
The uname is not the JNDI. The uname is the name you put in the persistent.xml.
Oh.
The persistent unit.
That has the database connectivity.
Yeah. And the persistent unit, you can configure your JNDI also, or you can, it need not be JNDI bound. Okay. And you can have more than one persistent unit, which corresponding one-to-one map to persistent context in your application. So in the application, you deal with persistent context, which is set up by persistent unit in the persistent.xml, but you can have more into that. Each of them will have at least one connection or more. Can be connection 2 too, because it's JNDI, right? So something like that. And this is one sample. You have all this header are standard. It is 2.0. 2.1, you have a 2.1 header. But basically, your unit is, you put a name here, and it has to be unique inside this persistent.xml. And you can, like what I mentioned just now, this I took somewhere from the Google App Engine, but it works there too. It could be a Hibernate mapping file too. You can specify here. Okay, and if you don't want an external mapping file, you can put your class here itself. You know. So, and there are much more variation than this, but the basic idea is there. You know, it all depends on the vendor, your database or your application server, how they do with it. They have to adhere to certain standard, but this is what you first deal with if you are talking about a JPA. Persistent context is just another abstraction. In a file, you have a persistent unit. In the application, you have to have something, right? Persistent context. Okay? One persistent context normally corresponds to one persistent unit, one database connection. Database connection can be a pool database connection. Persistent context, I stole this somewhere from Oracle presentation because I'm not a good typer. I don't want to type too many things, so I capture and paste here. Hopefully I still remember. But basically 1.0, there are certain, basically in summary, 1.0 you have it's 1.0, right? Basic object to relational that time. When they come out 1.0, the NoSQL is not there yet. So the mentality is really table based. 2.0, they have a couple more things enhanced. 2.1 is the latest one. They put in like stock procedure support, all those things. There are still things that you cannot do, but we're getting there. Persistent .xml, persistent unit and context. I already explained it verbally to you. So, okay, there's this thing default also. If you are a Maven person, the configuration over convention over configuration, right? So default is the same thing for JPA. If you do not annotate something, there are always some default into it. Let's say you annotate a Pojo class add entity, and if you are going against a relational table, you do not specify the table. So how does it know what to map to, right? There are some default. If your Pojo is called John, then your table will be John. Something like that, right? So these are the defaults. There are a couple more defaults. Add many to one. Let's say you put vname, the following key will be vname_id, unless you override. Okay, one to many, it's kind of obvious here, or maybe not too obvious. If you call your this collection this property C, then it will be mapped to p_c, a join table. It has another third table. They call it join table, right? So this kind of thing you can do it just reading yourself, I guess. I just want to let you know that what is the default. Okay, since we don't have much time, so JPA normally you do select, you do update, you do insert, and you do delete, right? So how do you do that differently from JDBC? So I bring some example here instead of talking whole day. Hopefully it's clear for you. So let's say you want to do a select, right? You will seek help of the Facade EntityManager, and you create a query, and you pass in it looks like SQL, but it's not SQL, because this whatever you select there is not a column. It is your Pojo followed by the property, okay, of the Pojo, and then you can say from the Pojo itself. Okay, so I think it's a bit more natural, but this is not really a SQL. So this is JPQL. Of course, this is a simplified example probably, but when it get complicated, you see the difference. But mainly, it does not support join. Okay, so in this case, it get a result set. It's a collection, just in case there are more than one object. Otherwise, the collection will contain only one object. And you can do whatever you need to do in that. That's select.
So you can use conditional statements, right? Where class and can you?
In Hibernate you can do joins in Hibernate.
Right.
HQL.
But not here.
JPQL, you could do that by saying that the property equal to something, but you cannot do join. Because the join is actually, when you design it, you expect you have to design in such a, that's why I say impedance mismatch, right? The one property, you could point it to external table if you're talking about relational, or it could be embedded, and that embedded collection is actually another set of rows in the same table. So you have to design it, but you cannot assume that there is a join. Unless you want to write a native query. I'll show you.
Then you have a
native query, you can do that. There's a native query support. But now we are talking about really building objects, annotated objects.
Okay.
Insert, same thing also. And JPA obviously is based on the relational model. That's why there's always transaction. MongoDB have transaction too, but it's only transaction specific to the document. But JPA is very powerful. most people, there are two JPA. We can talk whole day about that, but just container managed and user managed. It used to have that BMP, remember, Beam managed persistent? That's no longer valid. You can manage your transaction here yourself. How do you manage that? You get the transaction and you start begin. As soon as you begin, anything that you do there, including if you create another transaction, that is supported too. But we will talk about that is advanced topic. That is another. We'll talk about the isolation layer, all those things, you know. But simplify it a bit. When you get the transaction, you pass in your object. A thing here is your Pojo object that you already annotated nicely. Everything well designed. It's not like no structure, no schema. And then you call persist. Okay, and automatically it will see whether you have changed. Your property has changed or not, or if it's the same, it's not going to go to save in the database. So that's another advantage for you. You know, you don't have to write all this code. Yeah, caching. You know, remember Hibernate have a second level cache. All those things. You know, all those things, assuming it's under Hibernate, are still supported, but it's just you don't have to bother about those things unless you want to configure it. And then you commit. Then it will save accordingly. If the object is not there. If there's some differences, it will save only the part that is related. It's like magic. But that we are talking about insert. I'm pulling into update in the scenario also. Obviously, insert there's nothing there, right? So insert. But I'm talking about update. If things are already saved, it will not save again. Okay. So update is. You cannot just update things without retrieving the Pojo from the database. Remember this is a bit of because historical reason with the EJB too. You know, EJB, remember there's a dirty checking of those things, you know, long story, but JPA, you need to retrieve the entity from the database first. Okay? It makes sense also, right? Why would you update something that does not even in the database yet? So retrieve it, you know, and change it, like in this case, set title. Okay? Set title, set description, and then persist. Okay, and then commit. So that's the model. Always do a lookup first. There are slightly different way to do that, but I'll ask you to Google that yourself. But this is the most common way to do it. Any questions? Oh, cool. That means my English is good. Delete. Again, get the transaction. Transaction is good, right? Because you don't delete something and then the other party will thought that it's still looking into it, you know. Transaction is always good. When you get transaction, if you're talking about Oracle, it do some locking, fanciful locking for you. You know, MongoDB do not have any locking yet. Oracle is good. You have the table locking, you have the row locking, any locking you want. So, and then you find these objects, and then if you can find it, you check whether it's now or not. If you cannot find it, it will be now. Then don't delete it, right? Then if you find it, just remove it. That's it. And then commit. Simple. So why wouldn't anyone use JPA, right? It's simple. I don't get any bribe from.
Hibernate is more popular. In general.
It has more features.
It has and more better marketing.
Yeah.
Looks better in your resume, probably. I didn't say that. Also, by default, if you are talking about join, this is slightly this slide should be after whatever I talk about native query. But if you are dealing with join in JPA, it is always auto join by default, unless you do something with it. More is better than less, right? Okay, if you want to turn off the outer join, you put the optional equal to false. This should come before that, I guess. Slight mistake. What if you have a very complicated object hierarchy? You know, what happened? You don't have capability to do join. You know, you need to Oracle need to make it like more attractive, right? They support this called createNativeQuery. I think I don't think NativeQuery was there when in 1.0. It's 2.0 or above. Definitely. There's no 3 yet. 2.0. 2.1. EJB3 Part 2, that JPA is only 2.1 currently. Yeah, they are talking about 2.2, but that's not even there yet. So you could write if let's say you have existing complicated SQL, you can call this method and put in that, and then it will automatically return as a collection of objects. But I think you are losing some features there. Just Google it, make sure you understand the limitation. But there is a way for you to, if let's say you really miss your joins, you know, you don't really want everything to be objects, you know, you can, there's a way to do that.
But the names and the column names should change, right, to match the POJO columns. It's not the actual database tables name.
Yeah,
Those are like POJO names.
It should be no. I think when I read about this native query, it is this query all are really a table.
It's like actual table.
Yeah.
Then how does it get mapped to the POJO?
I cannot recollect that.
It doesn't.
It doesn't?
This
Oh, it's
is
always
the
native?
If you're using native query,
Right.
the whole point of the ORM concept vanishes, right? You're basically
Yeah.
finding this object.
It's all database.
Yeah, probably if I remember correctly, your collection you need to define it in a couple of POJO, but not everything are mapped to POJO or need not to.
Okay.
Right? Otherwise, you will not know, right? You know, they probably know only the top level
Right.
POJOs.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
this is straight SQL, right? So this is like JDBC call.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
I mean, whatever you do here.
As far as I remember, this is really
if you
SQL.
want those changes in your objects, basically you have to go find after you do this.
Mm.
So that way
And then probably you have to. That's why I say there is
Yeah, I
something
see.
that you lose.
Those are actual table columns.
Yeah.
I see that.
So you have to probably write your own persistent logic or something. You know. But it's there. For select, yeah, good, I guess.
Complicated ones.
You know.
Okay. We work for CADs now.
Transaction attribute, all those things is not part of the JPA. It's part of the EJP. And today is not about EJP, right? I'm pretty sure you know what is the isolation level and you know the table locking, all those things. Those are EJP later. You know. Implementation. So this has been there since 2006, right? Even before Oracle purchased Sun. So EclipseLink was the first one that implemented this. Actually, EclipseLink was the top link. Well, I remember when I used the top link, they are so fanciful, GUI, they can map all those things, you know. So that is originated from that. Oracle just give it to Eclipse. And GlassFish is the owned by Oracle, right? So it's a reference application server. Of course, they have that.
like JBoss.
Yeah, JBoss is what they have. It's like JBoss for Oracle. OpenJPA is another one, and Hibernate. They really implement a part of the JPA since 3.2 and above, I remember. And also, if you are not anti-Google, Google App Engine also support since JPA 1.0. Right now they are at 2.0. So Google App Engine is a big table, right? It's not relational, and it fits well too. There are certain things that you lose, but like what I mentioned just now, this is another topic. But JPA 2.1 they support going against the NoSQL. So add entity, you can put add NoSQL. It magically persists for you. Okay, so check out the JPA if you have time. This is just a what is that?